All right, let's see a few more. H-Town Creole. Saints should get the best player available because the team is in rebuild denial. Will Campbell and Jones are leaving LSU next season. Rebuild denial. That's a good one. I haven't heard that before. Rebuild denial. What stage of grief is rebuild denial? Is that the third or fourth stage? But yeah, I mean, I land on this differently every time I think about it. And like, what is a rebuild? And what are you looking for to rebuild for you not to deny it? Right? Like what are the Saints doing that says we're not trying to get younger on the roster? And I don't know. I kind of feel like they are. I kind of feel like that is what they're showing you by not getting aggressive in free agency, letting David Onyemata walk last year, right? Drafting a first round defensive tackle and signing a couple younger defensive tackles in Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard, right? You're talking about a team that everyone's like, hey, why are they thinking about trading Marshawn Lattimore? I mean, to me, that's a soft rebuild. And, I think the when you talk about rebuild denial, it's not about just a static rebuild of like, hey, we're not good enough here. We're probably not a title contender right now, so we don't want to act like one. And we want to be a little bit more judicious about how we dole out free agency dollars, how we spend our assets in the draft, how we evaluate younger players versus veterans who, maybe you have to play to learn versus have a little higher floor at this point, but they could reach their ceiling with playing time. And I do think the Saints are there. The issue is I don't think there's a lot of people who probably wouldn't accept that as a rebuild because their definition of rebuild is tear everything down to the studs and literally just start fresh with rookies and second year players and third year players. And see, I don't like that. I don't want to see the team do that. So I'm never going to say, hey, they should, because I just don't think that's, I've watched teams do that. I've watched teams be bad. I've watched teams be bad. Not you want to say intentionally, but they've set up situations where they're probably going to be bad and they succeed at being bad. And I don't know. As a fan of a team, you don't want to be watching your team do that, right? Like we talk about getting the fan base excited. No one's getting excited for this team to lose 15 games. Maybe you go get a quarterback, maybe you don't. Maybe you draft Bryce Young. Maybe you get a quarterback that is a bust because this team has never shown the ability to go draft a quarterback. So I don't know. I think you could go about it in a variety of ways, but I mean, Will Campbell and Jones. If there's one thing I know about the Saints, it is that I should never get too excited about LSU players in the draft. Even now that they're willing to take some LSU players with Foster Moreau, Tyrann Mathieu, I still don't think they're going to draft guys just because they're close by. Scout without clout. We get one or two more in here. It says if we simply draft offensive tackle well this year, defensive end well next year, and QB year after, we could be back in contention. I think it's too early to say whether our rebuild is going well or poorly yet. Yeah, right. I agree with that. I do think they are trying to soft rebuild. Now, the success at which you do it is another question. But I agree. I think this is a year where playoffs would be a victory. And I think you can get to the playoffs if things break your way in a way they haven't in the past. And if Derek Carr is more comfortable and if you can build out the offensive line in front of him in a way that is helpful. But I do think they are in a rebuild. It's kind of like when you're looking at the economy and you're like, are we in a recession? I'm poor, but is everyone else poor? Are we technically in a recession, or is it just like, everyone's gas prices are really high and I have to buy Wonder Bread instead of the other bread? I don't know. That's kind of what it is with a rebuild. Like, I wish there was like a governing entity that could be like rebuild so that we could all just stop debating about whether it's happening or not. So here's one we can close on because I disagree with it. Roderick Dewey says you can't truly rebuild with an aging quarterback. And I don't know. I kind of feel like the opposite. I feel like you can't really rebuild unless you have an aging quarterback. because otherwise you're just screwing over a kid, right? Like, it's really difficult to rebuild around a rookie quarterback. Like, look at what the Panthers are doing. The Panthers, like, the Texans got really lucky with how they were able to pull their situation off. But one of the reasons it worked as well as it did is that rebuild started 2 years before they drafted their rookie quarterback, right? So they had pieces in place. And Davis Mills was the sacrificial lamb, or whoever else was there was the sacrificial lamb. By the time CJ Stroud stood behind that offensive line, it was a really good offensive line. By the time he was throwing to his receivers, you had quality receivers there for him to throw to. You know, they had a not a great defense, but a good defense. Obviously, they had the rookie head coach. And the only way you get there is by going with a veteran quarterback. So I would argue that you are actually in a very good space to rebuild now if you continue to do that. Whereas if you go draft Jaden Daniels, the Commanders say the Commanders draft Jaden Daniels, that team's not ready to win. So you are committing your franchise quarterback to 1, 2, 3 seasons of just relentless misery. And that's tough to build around. And by the time you build up your roster again, have you stunted your quarterback's growth? And he's never going to be a guy that can get you more than 7, 8 wins. And at that point, you're stuck in the middle. So I don't know. I think you're talking about Derek Carr, and you're saying if they were trying to rebuild, they wouldn't have Derek Carr right now. And I disagree with that. I think you very much can rebuild with Derek Carr, but you have to be willing to draft a quarterback behind him and develop a quarterback behind him. And that's what I'm not sure the Saints are willing to do at this point. Maybe they are. If they go and take Michael Penix in the second round, maybe that's their signal to you. If they don't, then it becomes tougher. And you're looking at Jake Haener and being like, yeah, maybe. I don't think so. But I think it's an interesting question. Radrick says, it works for Peyton Manning. Okay, yeah, sure. It works for Peyton Manning. But I don't think that you're going to get very far if you base all of your NFL takes around like, oh, if you just take Peyton Manning, you'll be fine. Yeah, I think the Saints would be happy if they could find a way to draft Peyton Manning. They'd be good. But no, and you're right in the sense that Peyton really struggled in his rookie year. You know, he had one of the worst rookie years of any quarterback you'll find, or at least any quarterback that ended up starting for 10 plus years. But he is the exception, not the rule. And one more. The only way you keep an aging QB is only if you start if you start to invest in a new one. Like, we're on the same page here. Right. So if you're someone who really wants the Saints to rebuild, the answer is not cut Derek Carr and commit to losing. The answer is bring in a quarterback that ideally could start in 2 years, right? For example, like look at the teams that have been successful at replacing veteran quarterbacks with young quarterbacks. What have they done? Draft Pat Mahomes and let him sit behind Alex Smith for a couple years. Those Chief teams made the playoffs. They weren't good enough to win in the playoffs, but they made the playoffs. Those were good teams. So you rebuilt around Alex Smith and allowed Pat Mahomes to get better. And when Pat Mahomes showed up, he obviously was already ready to win. And then, obviously, if everyone could draft Pat Mahomes, it'd be great. Jordan Love, another example. Aaron Rodgers, another example. When you can do that, you have a much better chance